Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was January 19th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Well, it's a little bit of a psych out because we're not starting today's document right now, right away. We have some matters to discuss about yesterday's document. But what I found out about yesterday's document happened as I was on the hunt for today's document. So it's all just mixed up together, and that's just how it goes on this journey. So let me explain what happened. I was all ready to go with a document for January 19th, and I was really excited about it because Joan is talking about falcons, and he's referring to something that he's getting from Turkey, the country Turkey, and it was looking like a really interesting letter. So, I'm looking at it and I'm getting ready to think about, all right, here's, what I could say about its sourcing and so on. And I reread the last line, and it is the date of the 19th, but it's for the month of May. So this is an instance where in the register, I think it was 1952, there's just this really interesting chronological interruption that happens where I had these January letters, and then all of a sudden, boom, we've got a letter from May. There's actually a couple letters from May, and then we go back to January and February. So in that moment, I thought to myself, crud, that means I'm going to have to not talk about this document with the Falcons. I can have it as the May 19th document, and so that's likely when we're going to hear about that one. But now I have to find a document from the 19th. And the other thing to keep in mind about the hunt for a document from January 19th is that this is the day that the historians really have consensed on Joan and Violante making their entrance as a couple into Barcelona. Now, Violante had already been there, laying groundwork. She'd been in Granollers on the 16th. She was back in Barcelona, but maybe she, met Joan as he was approaching the city, and then they enter together. That's my guess as to what happened there. Maybe they had one night in some place on the way or in Granollers. I don't know. It's really hard to locate documents about this day of entrance into Barcelona. And probably that's because they were busy talking with people. They had arrived into the city. This is a really big deal. The king has arrived to the royal palace for the first time, and it's been quite the build-up as there's been a delay of a couple weeks. And so my guess is that they're not really having a whole lot of time to write a lot of documents or attend to a lot of business. So there's a real lack in the registers of documents from January 19th. And if there is a document somewhere in these registers that commemorates their entrance into Barcelona on this very special day, well, I have yet to find it, and none of the historians who've written about it have attached that claim to a specific register and folio archival reference. And so it's pretty clear that Joan and Violant were both in Barcelona starting on January 19th. And so I think maybe the historians have made an inference, but it's possible there is some work out there, maybe one of the Catalan Renaixença historians who located some document, and everybody has just been working from that, including Josep Roca in 1929. So maybe I just have to do a little bit more digging back through the secondary literature to find that document. But alas, I have run out of time. Here I am on January 19th, and I haven't been able to find it. So I started looking for a document for January 19th, which was a little bit tough for the reason I just explained, looking through various registers. Okay, and I open up the Gratiarum register for Joan because I knew, based on a reference from Benjamin Gampel's book, that there was going to be a document a few days ahead in that register. And I said, well, maybe there's something for the 19th in that register. So I open it up and I start at the very beginning. It starts in January of 1387, kind of looking through the first letter. Okay, something from a different date. The second letter, I get to the end, and it's January 18th. And I think to myself, could this maybe actually be the January 18th letter that I spent over 2 hours looking for the day before? And lo and behold, my friends, it was right there on the second folio of this Gratiarum register, Register 1890. That's where the outgoing letter to Pedro de Guardia, the safe conduct letter that I was talking about yesterday, that's where it was, in the Gratiarum register. The Gratiarum register, I think it's named Gratiarum because it's about the document that was cited by Benjamin Gampel from a couple days later in this Gratiarum register. It is a letter that certifies the receipt of a fine from the Muslim community of, Fraga. Yeah, the Muslim community of Fraga. And they were fined for starting some ruckus against the Jewish population of Fraga. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more deeply. But it has to do on the actual episode coming up a couple days from now. But it has to do with a penalty being paid for what was seen as a misbehavior. So why is a document about providing safe passage to the chief chaplain for the Archbishop of Zaragoza in the same register as the certification of the receipt of a fine for a conflict between Jews and Muslims? It's really confusing to say the least, to try to figure out, well, why is this document in this type of register? And hopefully by the end of this project, I'll have a more solid idea. But right now, I'm just throwing my hands up saying, I can't believe that this happened, that I went through 100 folios of the Officialum, and then at the beginning of the Gratiarum is where I find the document that I was looking for. So, all right, that's my little gripe about the organization of the chancery staff of the Archive of the Crown of Aragon in the late 14th century. But let's look at this as also a wonderful development, because for maybe the first time in 639 years, the outgoing letter, the one for Pedro de Guardia for the safe passage, and its copy in the Chancery Register, they are brought back together in a digital space on the webpage for yesterday's episode. So that, I think, is a pretty cool outcome, and I am really thrilled to have done that. It's pretty cool to make that connection, even if it's for some kind of, I don't know, minor occurrence in the grander historical narrative here. It's still just this fun archival moment that I really like. And here we are. We're all the way in to today's episode, and I'm talking mostly about yesterday. So I didn't even end up choosing a document from that register. I mean, there wasn't one. There was not a January 19th document in that Gratiarum register. And so I just went back to the itinerary put together by Daniel Girona y Llagostera, and he had identified a document from January 19th, and of course, his main goal was to track Joan's location, and indeed, at the bottom of the document that he had identified in his itinerary, which is Folio 10R of Register 1953, at the bottom we see, indeed, that this document is identified as having been made in Barcelona on January 19th. That's what the document says. So sometimes we've seen this a little bit fudged, but I'm pretty sure that Joan really was in Barcelona on January 19th, and perplexingly, folks, it's not some grand document that had to have risen to his attention on his very first day in Barcelona because it was so urgent. No, it seems to be kind of another humdrum business-like letter. It has to do with Martí and some kind of business arrangement happening in Montblanc, which in this letter is called by its Latin name Montes Albi. Albi is actually a name for white, and it is like blanc, a word to describe the color white. So Montes Albi, Mont Blanc, White Mountain is the name of this place. And indeed, it was actually a significant city in the Middle Ages. It was the 7th largest city in Catalonia. Joan, on January 16th, the day that he made his son, Jaume, 3 years old, into the Dauphin of Girona, he created a dukedom for his brother. So on that day, Martí became the Duke of Montblanc. And so at the very top of this folio, we can see the probata symbol and then Domino Duque Montes Albi, Lord Duke of Montblanc. That is Martí. Now, what is going on in this letter? It's a nice long Latin letter. And so, of course, I struggled. And of course, I used my ChatGPT AI crutch. And what I came up with was that this is some kind of business deal. It doesn't sound dramatically urgent, but maybe it is. Because on Joan's busy day of showing up to the royal palace as king for the first time ever, this is the document that he produced on that day. And it seems like some kind of a warning. So there's these business partners in Montblanc, and one of them has a name that was kind of strange to me because it is looking to me like it's a form of George. Like, if it's pronounced with the hard G, it would be Georgius, or Georgius with the soft G. And that's strange because in Catalan, the name George is rendered Jordi, Jordi, and there's a lot of people named Jordi. So that made me wonder if possibly this Georgius is maybe from someplace else that spells George differently, or maybe that was just another way to spell George, and it's not an indication of anything. But that is a question that came up for me. There's some kind of business problem happening because the second to the last line of the letter, right before the dating clause, it reads alioquin imputaretur merito culpem vostrem. That basically means otherwise the blame will be rightly imputed to you. The blame. So Joan is saying, y'all got to take care of this. You got to make good on whatever deal you were doing. Otherwise, the blame is going to fall on you, vostrem. Well, who is the you? It's a second person plural, vostrem, and that is the way that they refer to each other if they're members of the royal family. So they don't use the singular second person. So this could actually be Joan saying to Martí that if he doesn't follow what Joan is laying out here, then the blame will be rightly imputed to him, to you, Martí, second person plural, royal you. And that, to me, would be a really big surprise, that Joan would talk to Martí like that, unless maybe they're just kind of, at a level of trust that when Martí reads that, reads it as like, yeah, okay, my bad, it's all right. Or maybe that message is directed at somebody else. And I'm looking at the lines that come right before, and it's not clear, because in Latin, they typically have very long sentences with multiple clauses that all refer back to some subject that could be lines and lines and lines above. And this is one of the reasons why I am coming to an understanding that there's way more Latin documents in these registers than I had gotten the impression of. I had gotten that impression, I think, because Latin is very, very time-consuming to unpack and translate. And so when historians are looking through these registers and making decisions about what they're going to write about, they have to make a decision. Am I going to sink a whole half a day into figuring out what this Latin letter says? Especially if it seems like something that's just not germane to their research topic. They're just not going to do it. And so if they see one in Catalan that might not be as germane, they might decide to go ahead and translate it because it's not as much of a time cost for them. So what happens over time is this accrual in the secondary literature of more Catalan letters than Latin. And so if you're just looking at the secondary literature, you can come away with the impression, like I did, that it's like 90% Catalan and 10% Latin. When really, what I'm starting to see is that it's like maybe a majority Latin. I mean, I wouldn't flip that ratio, but I would say we're at least like 50-50 here. So this is a wake-up call for me that I'm not going to dodge Latin like I was kind of maybe hoping to. I have to kind of spend some time getting my Latin kind of up to snuff if I really want to make the most out of all this. All right, that brings me to the end of today's installment of the Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Companiana. Thanks for listening! And if you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Remember, the motto of the Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. Look at yesterday's documents webpage for that cool reunion. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.